What is up, Bitcoiners? Welcome to another episode of Fed Watch. As always, I'm here with Ansel Lindner, and we have a treat for you guys. This is an inspirational and absolutely fiery podcast with the great Max Keiser. Ansel, what do you think of this one?
Oh man, I remember going to one of my first Bitcoin meetups, and Max Keiser, his content was, we were discussing Max Keiser's show. So he has been around since the beginning. He's influenced me and my friends, early friends in Bitcoin. So yeah, wow, what an honor to interview him. It was great.
Yeah, guys, so many insights here, so much history. Just like Stacy, Max is an amazing storyteller. He can call back to historical events and historical moments just in a moment's notice, and really makes for a fantastic podcast and fantastic education. So I think you guys are really going to like this one. A lot of great sound bites in here. The orange pill lifestyle, y'all. That's a new one, and I'm going to be throwing that one around. But yeah. You can get red pilled, but orange pill is a lifestyle. Orange pill is the action of living that way and being optimistic and using Bitcoin. So, guys, make sure to listen to this podcast. Make sure to follow Max and make sure to check out our sponsor. This is Blockstacks. This is Stacks 2.0. This is a blockchain that enables you to do all of the decentralized things that other blockchains are advertising, but it is built with Bitcoin and using Bitcoin as the native currency. Even when you support Blockstacks with STX staking, you get paid out in BTC rewards on the Blockstacks blockchain. So make sure to go check out Blockstacks. Again, stacks2.com. That's the best place to learn about all of the capabilities on the Blockstacks blockchain and learn how you can get paid in BTC for supporting a decentralized alternative to a lot of the apps that are out there. That's stacks2.com. That is enough from me. Enjoy this podcast with Max Keiser. Bitcoiners, I am thrilled to bring you this episode of Fed Watch. We are joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Max Keiser. Ansel, Max, how's it going, guys?
It's going great, man. Thanks for having me on.
It's going great. We are in the presence of greatness. I've been watching Max for probably 8 to 10 years. We interviewed Stacy earlier, and this is an honor for me. Welcome to show, Max.
Great to be on. And, it's exciting times, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. I think I'm one of the very few boomers that are so actively involved with Bitcoin. I see some of these other people, these other boomers make comments about Bitcoin. It's embarrassing for me as a fellow boomer, how dumb they are.
Yeah, well, I do a lot of talking with another boomer who really gets Bitcoin well, and that's Bitcoin Tina. So not all the boomers are dumb. And one of Bitcoin Tina's points is that don't underestimate the boomers because they're going to get it eventually, and they're going to be buying Bitcoin hand over fist.
Yeah, true. There's a lot of buying power there. So, yeah, he's right. I have to agree with that.
So, Max, we wanted to kind of start off, and I thought a really good question, since a lot of people already know your history, is I want to know what would 2021 orange-pilled Max tell to pre-Bitcoin Max, a Max who obviously, kind of already knew that a bunch was amiss, but maybe hadn't, experienced Bitcoin quite yet.
Right. Well, my history goes back to the long time, actually, because on Wall Street in the 80s, when I was a stockbroker, was the beginning of a lot of financial innovation. It was Michael Milken and junk bonds, and a lot of structured products were invented at that time because discount brokerages led by Charles Schwab came into existence. So Wall Street had to come up with some competing products. And that's when I started my career on Wall Street in 1982, during this really explosion in products and new products. And this idea really that you started to see how securities were broken up and sold into separate packages. You sold the interest separate from the corpus, from the bond is separate from the interest. And, this led to all kinds of interesting things, credit default swaps, derivatives. It was the beginning really of when finance just totally left any connection to fundamental valuation, right? So in 1971, the U.S. went off the gold standard. And so by the mid 1980s, with Reagan in office, all the deregulation that went on. And so you really had a total disconnect between valuation for securities and any underlying fundamental valuation. And since interest rates have gone down to zero, that trend has gotten even more ludicrous. You saw what happened to GameStop stock in the past week and how that's being bounced around by people with unlimited credit. There's no way to value these securities because interest rates are zero, et cetera. So then flash forward to 1990s. I started a company called the Hollywood Stock Exchange. I have a patent on a virtual currency. This is a market-making technology for virtual security and virtual money. And so that was my first really deep dive into the architecture and technology of a virtual currency. And I learned a lot from that experience when I was running the Hollywood Stock Exchange, how virtual currencies would interact in an economy, in an environment, how people respond to them, how it was obvious to me that people responded to virtual money the same way they responded to any other form of money. So there was no difference really in people's minds. And this is where all the action in virtual currencies and Bitcoin takes place, is in people's minds, right? Because what makes money, it depends on what people think. And if people think that Bitcoin is money, then it's money. And then you get deeper into it, and that idea is strengthened by many layers that you can go into it. So flash forward to 2011 when I first heard about Bitcoin. So then I was like, oh, okay, I see. This is, instead of a centralized digital scarcity, which is what I had more or less invented in 1996. This was a distributed, decentralized scarcity, right? So that's the key difference with Bitcoin. So, you can go down the list. Many other aspects to it are revolutionary. So that's what got me immediately interested in it. So I just started to just promote it on the show, talk about it on the show. There's also, with Max and Stacy, for almost 20 years now, we've been doing battle with bankers and central bankers and fiat money. Even before Bitcoin, we were always attacking the central bankers and the fiat money pushers and the bankers. So when in 2011, when Bitcoin came around, not only was it a continuation of the digital currency story, but it was also now a new way to do battle against the central bankers. And now we're seeing it today, because central bankers like the central banker at the Bank of England this week making comments at Davos that he's really getting flustered, and they're worrying about this, and they're trying to figure out what to do about it. Christine Lagarde is worried about it. So this is the political edge to it. I mean, there is a political edge to it, to Bitcoin, which I think is not either. It's not talked about a lot, or that conversation is going to be dominated by the opposition. So the people who are against Bitcoin are going to start positioning Bitcoin in political terms and to paint Bitcoiners in unflattering, politically charged ways, like being, quote, anti-American or anti-freedom or whatever. So I think we're gonna see that in 2021. So that's kind of a long answer, but hopefully that answers the question.
Sure. Well, I mean, you definitely gave us a very good insight into your history and why you're primed to understand Bitcoin effectively immediately. But in terms of this idea of like people being orange pilled, like Bitcoin really opens people's eyes. I'm curious, like you were kind of already pre-orange pilled. Like, have you been further orange pilled, and have you like learned more that you would love to communicate to kind of like past Max?
Well, there is again, I think Bitcoin is like the beginning of the end of humans' consciousness that we've experienced since the beginning of our species. That we've always been frustrated by an inability to communicate. And markets and price signals were a great leap forward in helping humans communicate over distances and over time. And we call that globalization, or we call that society. We even sometimes call that religion, right? Religion is just price signals and ceremonies and rituals to try to enhance communication, because humans are social animals and they want to communicate. With perfect money, which Bitcoin is, it's the end of that struggle. We are now entering a period of perfect communication, entering that hive mind that people talk about. And it's a profoundly changed experience for humans as a species. We're entering into a new epoch as a species. So to be alive at that time is incredible. When you think about the history us humans have been through, it's not a huge history. If you look at the history of our planet and the history of the solar system and the history of the universe, we've only been here a very, very, very short period of time. And it's been mostly a struggle. But I think that struggle is about to end, because every 10 minutes, every single thought, which is now priced in Bitcoin, is synced up and audited in a block. And we're born again every 10 minutes. Born again every 10 minutes. Everything is completely audited and synced, and communication is set every 10 minutes. There's no legacy. There's no legacy in the sense of a legacy in a technological sense. There's no lag to the communication. There's no, the telephone, the telegraph, they were great ways to make things, the communication more in sync, but still there's tremendous lag of meaning and consciousness and syntax and verbiage and just the way people talk. I mean, even within very, very small groups of people, you can find incredibly divergent understanding of what is actually being said to who and why. And Bitcoin fixes all that, because all of our thoughts are going to be priced in Bitcoin. It's frictionless. It's free to. It's the language the mind uses to speak to itself. It's metaphysics and philosophy monetized in a way that we're going to take this huge evolutionary leap, and a lot of people are just not going to make that leap, and they will just be left behind. And a lot of people are taking that leap. I'm living the orange-pilled life. I feel as though I've got one foot in the future already. I was always a great student of metaphysics and physics, and I'm a big fan of Carl Jung and the idea of synchronicity, and I'm a big fan of Alan Watts, and I'm a big fan of kind of this idea of the universal unconscious mind and things like this. And what's been lacking is the hardest money ever, perfect money. And this is what we're on the verge of right now. I truly believe this to be the case.
That was awesome. Very big picture stuff there. Going from the very big picture down a little bit smaller of just the global economy as it exists today. I was hoping that you could give us some of your kind of basic themes of what you see going on in the economy. I mean, obviously we went from the global financial crisis to 2020 and now 2021, and of course Bitcoin's in there. But what do you see are the overarching themes in 2021 right now?
Right. So there's the 3 Ds: deglobalization, dedollarization, and depopulation. So with deglobalization, it started with Trump. When he came into office, he said, "I'm not a globalist, and it's America first." And I think this set off really a period where countries are really thinking more in terms of their own self-interest and less in the globalized sense. And so we're back to more of a mercantilist global economy, where countries are really battling each other for supremacy in somewhat of a zero-sum game. And the instruments and organizations of globalization, I think, will become less and less important. And we see this type of splintering and fracturing everywhere. You have Brexit going on. The UK left the EU, and Scotland's probably going to leave the United Kingdom, and Northern Ireland could join up with the Republic of Ireland. And and the U.S. and China seem to be more on an aggressive, belligerent, confrontational stance at these days. So I think the globalization period, we go to deglobalization. I think that's going to be a big theme. It's a very hostile environment, and obviously with the COVID crisis, it exacerbates this theme. When COVID hit, it was kind of like World War II. Remember World War II? The United States was uniquely positioned to come out of that war in a very, very good shape. It escaped the ravages that we saw in Europe. The economy was intact, and we had great manufacturing capacity, and we went on to the American century We were, quote, the winner of World War II. And the COVID crisis is this huge crisis, and it appears that though China will be the winner of that crisis because, the fact is that authoritarian regime was able to lock people down, and the economy is going to grow this year, and it's back up and running essentially. The U.S. is still struggling with it because the U.S. never really was able to respond. The U.S. couldn't even manufacture masks, right? So I mean, the U.S. is struggling. So it's kind of like was a loser in the COVID lottery would be the U.S. The winner in the COVID lottery was China. So I think that's
Can I add something too?
Yeah.
We let China, the U.S. let China set the precedents too. Like the precedents and the strategy was set by China, and they were much better suited to play that game than the U.S. The shutdown lockdown game is better suited for an authoritarian who could say, all right, we're opening up now. Whereas the U.S., like now you're seeing the politics play into it, how, it's become muddied up with so much other BS.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I'm not saying that they're better or worse, or we're better or worse. Right? At the point, just to emphasize what you're saying there, it's like they won that lottery and we lost that lottery. They just their systems were prepared, and also they had a few of these viruses before. But they had the SARS virus, and they've had several viruses. Like they've gone through several drills. The U.S. hadn't had a virus like this since 2018 or 2019, right? The last big virus in the U.S., the flu pandemic. So we had not really prepared for it. It wasn't really on anyone's radar when it hit, whereas China had already 2 or 3 examples of this. So deglobalization. Then we move on to de-dollarization. So de-dollarization, the U.S. dollar, like all reserve currencies, they last about 100 years and then they lose their place as world reserve currency. We've seen that over the past 500-600 years, starting with Portugal in the age of globalization and Columbus. They had the first kind of world reserve currency. Then it moved on to Spain and France and the Netherlands and England, and then finally the U.S. post World War I. But now I think the U.S. dollar is at the end of its run as world reserve currency. Countries are already trading bilaterally without the U.S. dollar. And the ability to operate outside the dollar using Bitcoin now has opened up avenues for, as Christine Lagarde has said, escape valve away from the U.S. dollar. So there's a lot of reasons to go into that. So there's a de-dollarization going on. And then depopulation. This is really fascinating. We had a guest on Kaiser Report last year who brought up, when I asked him, what's the basis for negative interest rates? Because we've never seen it in history, negative interest rates. And he said he thought it could be depopulation. So in other words, the markets are discounting mechanisms. They tend to discount future events. So these negative rates were telling us 2, 3, 4 years in advance of the trend of depopulation. In that the bond market was telling us something. And now what we're seeing with COVID, is that we're seeing some depopulation going on. How far this goes, to what extent? I saw a report this week from one of the major global NGOs saying that the rate of extreme poverty in the world is now starting to race higher for the first time in 2 or 3 decades, right? So the negative rates were telling us that the world was way over leveraged and much too fragile, and that's what and so what we could have done if we were reading markets and got those signals correctly was to start to reverse that problem. But instead, as in all Ponzi schemes, the tendency is to just keep doubling down on the Ponzi scheme. And even today in the U.S., the new administration, what we're hearing about it so far is that they're just going to keep doubling down on this Ponzi scheme. They're not going to address any of the fundamental foundational problems at all. They're just going to keep doubling down on money printing and all the problems that have gotten us to this point at this time. So those are my big 3, the big 3D themes of 2021.
Yeah, and matches with another D as well, demographics. because as all these countries, even China now is in a bad demographic shape, and Europe, I would say the U.S. is probably the best demographics out of these major economies, but that fits with your deglobalization as a trade lessens or slows down around the world. Then you have you can't support as many people because the economy is shrinking, and also the demographic structure. So yeah, that's really good depopulation. So moving on to the next thing, this kind of ties in with the end of the dollar system. And on this show, we talk a lot about inflation versus deflation. And we try to be as skeptical as possible about the quote unquote money printing, about, we have Jeff Schneider, who's a big Eurodollar person, and he makes a great argument for deflation. And the kind of idea of QE and fiscal stimulus being money printing is a very good argument as well. So I know that one of my favorite coined terms of yours is cantillionaire. So where do you fall on this inflation deflation kind of credit boom? Are we going into a credit bust? Is that deflationary? How can you flesh that out for us as much as you
Right.
can?
So under Clinton, we had China join the World Trade Organization and all that. And so America essentially exported its inflation, to China, right? So we were the beneficiaries to the extent that we were getting a lot of cheap stuff, cheap TVs, cheap clothes. So even though wages in America were going down, the cost of a lot of stuff was going down even more. So the quality of life didn't really appear to be getting horrible or going appreciably worse, because even though the purchasing power of the dollar was fading, you could buy more with it because it was cheaper, because it was being made in China, where you have slave wages. So that is now finished because the wages and the China economy and the growth has reached parity with the U.S. and the fact that it's moving beyond the U.S. So we're not going to have the benefit of that cheap prices anymore. And due to de-dollarization, countries like China that have trillions of dollars worth of reserves, and other countries are going to be dumping dollars. They're going to send them back to where they came from, and that is the U.S. So now, after this, you could call it a deflationary period driven by the virtually free labor of China and the manufacturing economy and the ease of credit for people to consume on credit. You now are going to see a kind of a tsunami of dollars roll back into the U.S. As these countries dump their dollars, and they're doing it right now. And in response to that dollar dumping, the central bank is aggressively accumulating them to try to mitigate the inflationary impact this might have. And so their balance sheet is swelling up by trillions of dollars. And but there is a limit to how much you can hide the supply of paper money in the system from reaching down into the actual prices of day-to-day goods and services that people are starting to notice. The commodities are now in a bull market, a secular bull market. So with for agriculturals and things like this, their prices are going up. We already have a period of shrinkflation where the effects of inflation were hidden by giving people smaller portions. The average size of a Milky Way bar has been shrinking over the past 10 years. The price hasn't gone up, but the size of the item keeps shrinking. It's called shrinkflation. And same thing with laundry detergent, or you find that the packages are smaller, right? And you're saying, well, I'm not paying any more for it. Well, you are on a per unit basis because it's getting smaller. So and all the statistical reporting on inflation by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, of course, always reports on those things that are being exported from China as their gauge of inflation. They don't count education or healthcare or housing. So if you were to create an index based on the stuff that people actually consume over the past 10 years, the prices are up on average over 50% a year. That's the true actual rate that people are paying. Anyone who pays for medical or education knows that the numbers being reported by the U.S. of of 1.5 to 2% inflation do not make any sense in terms of what the actual day-to-day experience is for people interacting with the economy. So they've used all these different tricks to hide the impact. Why do they do that? Because first of all, there's the cost of living adjustments that they don't want to have to pay for people living on Social Security and things like that. So the government doesn't want to have to actually report true inflation because they would have to start paying out more for the COLA adjustments, the cost of living adjustments, which they don't want to do. And number two, the banks are insolvent. The big banks in America are insolvent, and the debt load that they carry is beyond any, it's an insolvency situation. And so to pretend that these banks are not insolvent, they have to keep these rates artificially low, near zero, so that these banks don't have to admit the fact that they're insolvent, and all their friends would lose their jobs. So the central bank must keep printing all this money, and the reason they give for it is that they fear that they're fighting deflation. That's what they say they're doing. But they're actually causing the deflation. That's what they're causing. They're not fighting it. They're causing it by crowding out the viable portions of the economy that could be producing real GDP growth. They're doing it by loading up the system with more debt because all money is debt. It says right there on your US dollar, it says this is a note from the federal government. A note is a synonym for debt. It's a short-term debt is a note, right? It's just debt. So if they wanted to bring back inflation for real, and if they wanted to fix this economy for real, you know, within the tools of the government and the central bank, they would jack interest rates up to 5% overnight. That would weed out all the bad actors. It would restore the integrity in the dollar. It would favor savings. And you can't have capitalism without capital. And you can't have capital without a rate of interest that you're being paid for to hold capital. That's should be pretty obvious, but none of the policymakers want to acknowledge any of this. So they say they're fighting deflation, but they're actually causing deflation. And the dam is about to break, though, because all the areas, you know, it's like the federal government is like an alcoholic, basically, and they hide those bottles of booze in the house, right? And they can pretend like they're not an alcoholic for only so long. But eventually all those bottles that they've hidden of booze in the house, they start rattling around a bit. And they can't make their payments, and they lose their house, and they're on the street. Cities are breaking down, poverty rates escalating. At some point, you got to come to terms with the fact that, hey, America, you're fucking bankrupt. You know, you can't pretend like you're not a debt-aholic bum living on the handouts from China, essentially. You know, if China wasn't sending us all these cheap goods for our shit money, we would be completely in the third world right now. So they're not doing anything to stop that. They're just doubling down on all these horrible policies. So this is what Bitcoin is calling time on this. Bitcoin is saying, time out. We don't believe a word you're saying. That's why this thing's going higher. That's what Michael Saylor is doing. Michael Saylor is saying, you know what? I could play their game, borrow money and buy back my own stock at MicroStrategy, get myself some executive stock options, and make a couple of $1 billion. But he's saying, no, I believe the inflation genie is coming out of the bottle, and I'm going to not make $2 or $3 billion. I'm going to make $200 billion like Jeff Bezos by borrowing that money with a speculative attack, and I'm going to buy Bitcoin and watch it go to 200, 300, 400,000 a coin, and I don't care what happens to the U.S. economy. You know, he's thrown down the gauntlet, Jeff Saylor. It's an incredible thing that he's done. He's essentially told the Federal Reserve Bank to go fuck themselves. And he said that even those exact words last week on an interview. He said, if somebody wants my Bitcoin, they can go fuck themselves. I mean, this is from a CEO, a publicly listed company with billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, who's telling every other CEO in America to do the exact same thing. This is an insurrection. And thank God somebody manned up and took on these terrorists at the central bank.
Giabo, right?
Giabo, exactly.
So to drill into this China thing, because this is one of the things that I think about all the time, and there's a lot of people that, you guys talk a lot about the Thucydides trap and the rise of China and the decline of the West and the decline of the U.S. Do you think China has the possibility to become a global hegemon? And maybe it's like their time, they're rising right now, but you talked about the 3Ds. So they're rising right when the 3Ds are kind of wrecking the world for them. So how do you picture this rise of China, the new China century, something like that? Can you comment on that?
Right. So I remember back in the 80s when I was on Wall Street, there was, at that time, the idea was the rising power of Japan, that Japan was going to take over. And remember, the Nikkei average was at 40,000. The Imperial Palace, real estate of the Imperial Palace was worth more than the state of California. Some crazy thing. They were buying Pebble Beach Golf Club, Radio City Music Hall, Rockefeller Center. And Japan was going to take over the world. And then the internet hit. And America reasserted its dominance because the internet favored, again, the lottery wheel was spun. The internet was created. And America was uniquely positioned to benefit from the internet because you had all these entrepreneurs who took to the internet like wildfire and just invented business models and invented all these crazy things. And they reasserted America's global dominance. Whereas Japan, because their society is more conformist and it's groupthink and it's very, it's organized at the manufacturing level, and they were putting out cars cheap and kicking Detroit's ass. But when the internet hit, they couldn't transition. They couldn't shift. It was not something that the Japanese society, Japanese culture was able to adapt. And the U.S. reasserted itself. So, okay, here we are in 2021. Now another Asian country, China, is like, okay, we are positioned to take over as global hegemon. The U.S. is getting its ass kicked by COVID, as everybody else is. We're coming out of this COVID crisis in the best shape. And we've got great relationships with all these different countries, and we're trading bilaterally outside of the U.S. dollar. And so what could be the counterbalance to that? And the answer could be Bitcoin. So I noticed, by the way, that there's a huge new Bitcoin mining pool in Texas. The Bitcoin mining pools and the Bitcoin mining industry is actually migrating away from Asia. Looks like it's coming to the U.S., which is a great thing for the U.S. The energy costs here are very competitive, and that could be the only saving grace for the U.S. If we go toward a more Bitcoin standard for the global economy, the U.S. could be in a position to reassert its dominance if it gets on the Bitcoin bandwagon as soon as possible. Because China, again, just the culture and society and the authoritarianism of China, they're not going to take the Bitcoin because it's decentralized. There's no way to control it, essentially. So China's economy obviously is incredibly top-down command and control. And having the idea of a currency outside of the control of the government they're going to reject that. But in the U.S., actually, it plays to our frontier mentality better. So Bitcoin, it could be, but you would need it could happen without any participation in Washington at all. I mean, it's like Michael Saylor could band together with 30 or 40 other CEOs and effectively just put the government out of business. Just defund the government. They're not gonna have any money because fiat money is becoming worthless, and it's going to be in the hands of 20 or 30 Bitcoin gazillionaires are going to be in a position to restart the economy from scratch. But fine, that's the way it should be.
Max, you're kind of reminding me of a Pierre Richard kind of like tweet rant, where he was trying to convince the U.S. government to stop selling Bitcoin for dollars, because he's like, why would you sell precious Bitcoins for something you can just make infinitely on your own as it is? Like, how stupid do you have to be? Like, you better hold this thing for your own sake.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. You know, Pierre Richard, one of the best guys on Twitter, and he's absolutely correct. And it's tragic that the U.S. would sell their Bitcoin to venture capitalists in San Francisco. Tim Draper, I think, won the auction for U.S. Bitcoin, had a huge Bitcoin position. That those are strategic national assets of that we as tax-paying citizens should be owning. You know, they shouldn't be giving it away. It's like it's tragic. But so right now the mindset in the current administration is more toward money printing, MMT, right? They more command and control. They seem to, instead of competing with China, they seem to emulate China, right? So China's really the surveillance state of China is horrible, right? Because everything is tied to your social credit score. And if you don't go along with what the government is saying, you get degraded. And suddenly you can't get on an airplane, you can't get a train ticket, your mortgage rates go up. So it's totally dystopian in what's going on. And the U.S. looks at that and says, wow, we want, that's what we want. You know, that's not what we want. And we don't have to go down that path. It's like the U.S. I remember after 9/11, people were saying the reason it happened was a lack of imagination. Like nobody had ever thought this could ever be so. Even though there had been like 5 or 6 Hollywood movies with that exact same plot already, right? It's not that people hadn't imagined that was going to happen. It's that the people in charge are fucking stupid, right? So they shouldn't be in power for 20, 30, 40 years. They're impaired. They're cognitive impaired, not just in the White House, but all across Congress and the Senate. You got some fucked up people there that can't even. Jerry Nadler keeps pooping himself in public. That guy should not be in public office. He needs to be in an assisted living facility, right? That's not what we want in office. So we need to scorch earth it. Get rid of it all. With Bitcoin, you can do that. Just restart the whole thing from scratch. Americans will love that in the end, because we're hardy. We don't give a shit. We've got our guns, our Bitcoin, and our canned beans. Just give us a good government and we're fine.
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard famously said that Washington was like high school because they're all so immature and they don't know what's going on. They're not experts in anything. They're just public. They knew how to win the election. That's about it.
Right. I heard, Washington is Hollywood for ugly people.
Well, also the U.S. will benefit from having GBTC headquartered here, having Coinbase headquartered here, having the miners, like you said. So it seems like that would be, capital will go to where it's treated best. So all they need to do is just not get in the way and not treat it too harshly. And yeah, Bitcoin, I think, will continue to be centered around the U.S. Going forward. That's my idea.
It could be. It could be. I hope so. I think there's a lot of talent, a lot of capital, and it's we have some interesting situations happening around the world. So in Nigeria, which has 200 million people, something like 30% of the population is already using Bitcoin. And the demographics are very, very young. They've already kind of leapfrogged to hyper-Bitcoinization. And they're on a great path in terms of Bitcoin. You've got other countries like Iran, which is they're mining Bitcoin and apparently and storing Bitcoin, right? They're realize that this is a way out of U.S. dollar hegemony. Obviously, that's a huge political situation. You can dig into the politics of it, but the fact is, this is what they're doing. So these different countries are taking this approach. So I think, like I've said a couple of years ago, it introduces the idea of a hash race or a hash war, where like the U.S. had that Sputnik moment where they're like, oh my God, the Soviet Union just put a satellite into space. We got to get into the space race. And that was a great thing for the U.S. because it gave us a goal. Americans need a goal. We need to think like, to get out of our shit and just think of a goal. Put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Everyone was like, yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's fucking do it. Right? It's like, so if we were to articulate this and say we need to own, we need to have 20% of the hash rate by the end of the decade or something like that, and just go for that goal, the result would be reestablishing U.S. global dominance, and that's the policy that needs to be implemented.
So I want to jump in here and talking about deglobalization, kind of like these jurisdictions competing with each other. It really kind of yields its hand to the idea of like sovereign individuals and sovereign companies and people who leverage geographical arbitrage in order to, kind of be in the nicest place possible and then serve the entire globe via the internet. We're seeing Miami start to like compete in the US. I think one of the things that makes the US actually competitive is the states. The fact that there's literally geographical arbitrage built into the country is one of the biggest advantages that the US has that no one, really has a similar kind of footing there. So, I mean, what do you think about like this idea of jurisdictional arbitrage and how people can leverage Bitcoin and leverage the internet and leverage these competing jurisdictions in order to, change the world and change how we organize?
Right. Well, you see it in Wyoming, right? Caitlin Long and people in Wyoming, they're making Wyoming a Bitcoin friendly state. They've got a senator now who's also lobbying for Bitcoin. So Wyoming is already on that path. And you're right in that the states do have this jurisdictional arbitrage going on. We saw this with medical marijuana, right? So one or two states started it, then it spread to other states, and at some point it'll be a federal law. But right now, the federal law doesn't sync up with some of the states, but the states are pressuring. I think that was also, we've seen that in the past. So if one or two states go down the Bitcoin path and suddenly they're booming, and it's working, and it spreads to other states, then they have the ability to lobby the federal government and make it more of a federal law. But I agree with you. That is a very strong part of what we have going here, the separation of powers. And you see that between states and the feds. You see that within the government itself with the various houses of government, et cetera, checks and balances. So that there is an excellent quality there for sure.
Well, let's talk about even more like from a global perspective, because I think that's even more interesting, right? Like the breakup of states and then state competition. I feel like that has, really big macro implications.
Oh yeah. Like we've been saying, I think we're going to get into a hash war or hash race where right now the talk is regulating Bitcoin and how are we going to regulate Bitcoin? And I think it's going to flip. And I think it's going to be, the states are going to be like, how do we get more into Bitcoin? So it's going to be like a 180-degree flip, polar flip. It's just going to be like, wait a minute, we're thinking about this all wrong. And it'll happen because a state like Iran will suddenly have the hardest money in the world because they've got so much Bitcoin. And then the US and these other countries would be like, whoa, how the fuck did that happen? And they'll be like, uh-oh, wait a minute. We better get in this game. So it's game theory, and it's played out on the macro level. So we've seen game theory is baked into the protocol, right? January 3rd, 2009, the Genesis block, boom, all the game theory was already baked in. And it was played out in the mining space. It's played out in the altcoin space. Now it's being played out on the sovereign space and the nation state level, the central bank level. It's being played out at the biggest possible level. We knew it was going to come to this. We knew Christine Lagarde would have to make a comment, and Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England would have to make a comment, and Jerome Powell and all these people would have to start talking about it because it was baked into the cake. It's baked into the protocol. And we know the outcome. We know where this is going. You can't beat it, so you either accept it or you get trashed, right? You don't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin changes you. You see this on the money management level. So some money managers, like, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Peter Schiff, but he simply is somebody who is fighting reality. The reality is that this protocol is eating the world. It's eating fiat money. It's eating gold. It's taking spotlight away from gold, and for so many reasons that you could just you can't really pretend you don't understand it anymore. So he's just not adapted. History is gonna pass him by. And same thing with Rubini and Paul Krugman and people. They're just dinosaurs. They're not gonna come to the table. Some of them, even Michael Saylor in 2013, he was a Bitcoin skeptic, and then the fork wars of 2017 flipped him, and he was like, wait a minute, I get it. There really is anti-fragility here. It really is immutable. It really is everything these guys are saying it is. And if that's true, then I got to own it. So but some people are just never, ever they'll go to their grave complaining about Bitcoin. Bitcoin will be at $1 million a coin, and that'll be on Peter Schiff's epitaph. Here lies Peter Schiff. He never bought Bitcoin. The end.
Oh man, that's great. What do you think about CBDC? So maybe the 180-degree shift will be from when they try to do a CBDC and they cause hyperinflation in their country, like the ECB or somebody tries to do this, and so that kind of wrecks their currency, and they're forced to make 180-degree shift back to Bitcoin.
Right. They will come out with their digital currencies, and which is just reinventing fiat money, but there's no difference. The euro is already a central bank digital currency. So what's the difference? It's a centrally controlled digital money that there's already quadrillions of it out there. There's more than a quadrillion, quite literally, of derivatives and fiat money and digital money, and it's all nonsense. So they'll come up with what they're saying, like Venezuela just said this, right? They're going to remove all paper money. It's not that they're creating anything new with a central bank digital currency. What's new is that they're going to remove paper money. So that removes some privacy. And that's heinous. That's anti-human rights. That's a human rights abuse when you impinge on privacy by eliminating anonymous paper money. And that is tragic in so many ways. So, Bitcoin obviously is not centralized, it's decentralized. And so they don't compete. And it's a place for them. They have to sound like they're doing something. But even though they're not really doing anything except becoming more draconian and more of abusive toward human rights. That's the only thing they're doing. It's just government's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, more invasive and bureaucratic. And we know that it doesn't work. So I don't see, it's just a place that they have to appear to do something. The politicians have to appear to be doing something. That's why they build, a bridge to nowhere, right? Remember that story from a few years ago. It's a bridge that went nowhere, right? But they were able to say they were doing something, right? It's completely counterproductive. It's a complete waste of money. I mean, the whole Vietnam War was a bridge to nowhere. It was completely ill-fated from day one. They wasted 50,000 American lives, 58,000 American lives. There was never, ever going to be a win in that situation. It was just politicians wanting to appear to be doing something and not having the, humility to come out and say, we made a mistake. We need to get out. They had to go through the whole exercise of getting their asses kicked by a guerrilla army in the frickin' jungle over many years before and then they couldn't take it. So they had Sylvester Stallone reinvent the whole Vietnam War. And this time America won. if you remember the First Blood movies, this is anyone born after, in the 1980s or so, they would think that America won that war based on all the Hollywood movies that came out, kind of reinventing and re-narrating that whole thing. But I was alive during the time, and I can tell you that it was a very messed up situation. The president resigned, and it was messed up. Even as messed up as things are now, I don't think it's nowhere near as messed up as things were then. The economy was in horrible shape. There was a massive recession, the oil embargo, oil prices skyrocketing. It was quite bad. It's amusing that people are saying, everything is bad, but stock markets are at all-time high, bond market all-time high. The wealth in America has never been higher. So-called poverty in America is a joke. You go to a country with real poverty, like India. Okay, let's see. Talk about real poverty. There's no poverty in America. That's the joke. But the poverty-stricken in America live like freaking kings compared to 6-7 billion of the population out there that's eating dirt because U.S. dollar hegemony, for the most part, we're the beneficiaries.
Of the quintillion, of the Cantillon effect. If you get dollars first, you benefit over everyone else in the same position and not getting dollars first.
Right. So that plays out at the highest levels. So you have extraordinary, $1 trillion of wealth created during COVID crisis at the top. That's all just printed money. And, but there is now a realization that there is now a sea change. There is a big change coming. I think 2021 is when we see that change. I mean, the millennials and the Gen Z, when I talk to millennials, man, they're super smart. And it's not like the Gen X. You remember their whole generation was like slackers. They were like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. Then millennials came along. They're like, oh, actually, we're totally digital. We've got Bitcoin, and we're totally dissatisfied, and we're a bigger demographic than the boomers. And so that's I think the millennials are going to. The year of 2021, the millennials are going to kick ass. I think, aided by Bitcoin. When I look in the media space and I see guys like Tim Pool, Luke Rutkowski, who are like disciples of Joe Rogan, and they've got huge audiences. They're totally sharp as a tack. You guys in the Bitcoin podcasting space, they're all like super smart. Nick Carter is a freaking statesman. He's like the Ben Franklin of 2021. This guy is sharp as a tack. So this is who's going to reshape everything with Bitcoin. Bitcoin has got your back. It's got your back. No one's going to print more of it.
One great thing about millennials too is that no other country has a millennial generation. Really, that's why their demographics are so upside down. Like the Japanese and the Europeans, they didn't have babies, where the boomers actually had babies and have a millennial generation. So that separates the U.S. for sure.
That's interesting. Well, that sounds good. I support it. I support my local millennial. I support millennials. I just turned 61 years old, and I can tell you everyone is in their 60s is brain dead, except for Bitcoin Tina. And the Gen X, except for Stacey Herbert, then nobody's interesting there either. Not until you get to the millennials do you find the spirit of the revolution. Let's do it.
That's awesome, Max. This is a great way to end the show. Why don't you plug yourself and give your last word?
Well, we got the Orange Pill podcast, which is we just launched it a few months ago, and it's becoming quite popular. So you can follow that on Twitter, Orange Pill Pod on Twitter. You can go to YouTube and go to the Orange Pill podcast. We've got 65,000 subscribers right in the first few months. We got the new Orange Pill Daily Dose. If you go to orangepilldailydose.com, you can subscribe and get the Daily Dose, which has links and stuff into it. And we're doing that with Swan Bitcoin. which I love, Swan Bitcoin. They're very easy on ramp. Get your Bitcoin, do the dollar cost averaging. Also, if you want to get your Bitcoin off, it's easier. Like I try to get my Bitcoin off Cash App to put it in my Casa wallet, and the limits are severe, like $2,000 a day. That doesn't do it for me. With Swan, I can get it all off in a jiffy, put it in my Casa wallet, got my multi-sig. Now I'm ready for the revolution. I'm ready for the Michael Saylor to give the signal. Charge! We're ready to go. So all that's going on. So yeah, orange pill. Then we're coming out with some fashion line, the orange pill fashion. So it's gonna, you can live the orange pill lifestyle because we already were red pilled. I was red pilled already long ago. Orange pill is the lifestyle. It's the lifestyle of knowing, of being relentlessly optimistic, as Stacy has said.
Awesome. Again, perfect way to end the show. Thank you so much again, Max. You guys can find the show at FedWatch. Make sure to go to the FedWatch feed. That is the only place to get this show. Make sure to follow me at CK_Snarks and at Bitcoin Magazine. And make sure to follow Ansel at Ansel Lindner. Check out Bitcoin and Markets as well. One of the best podcasts in Bitcoin. Thanks a lot and have a good one. Stay optimistic.
Yeah, baby. Love it. Thank you.